Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We have returned from recess. The Committee of the Whole is now back in session. I will read off the rules of engagement as we continue on in Bill 186. The rules of engagement for Bill 186-35 is meant to allow for open and greater discussion among our colleagues as we discuss fiscal year 2020 appropriations. These rules will assist in ensuring decorum and order, allowing for a smooth process as we deliberate on the bill. The Director of OAB has already provided you a presentation of the numbers and allocations that you all have a copy. All my colleagues will have an opportunity to ask questions in two rounds of 15 minutes around. Amendments will be proffered on the floor only after the clerk is in receipt of a Word version and the amendment is emailed to the clerk. Amendments to increase an appropriation or funding amount provided in the measure as proposed or intends a new or amended appropriation must be accompanied by a corresponding and specific offset or funding source, basically a pay-as-you-go. For sections of the bill, in Section 1 on the revenue projection, we will consider each general fund and special refund revenue category and that federal grants and aid in sequential order, and we'll go down through it sequentially one by one. Each revenue fund category shall be deemed closed once every member who wishes to speak has done so, and I have gaveled that the revenue or revenue federal grants and aid item is closed. The OAB Director and BBMR Director, Mr. Lester Carlson, will be available to respond to any questions regarding revenue funds, should there be any questions. In going through the first couple of pages, I will ask you to review, and if you should have any questions, please do so at that time. We will go through these in sequence as listed in the bill. Those are chapters 1, the rules, and for chapters 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7, we will consider each section in sequential order. Each section will be deemed closed once each member who wishes to speak has done so, and once I've gavelled that the section is closed. For chapter 5, which is the department agencies, I will consider each subsection within section. In Section 1, and in sequential order, each subsection shall be deemed closed once every member who wishes to speak has done so, and I have gavelled the section closed. For any amendments, please provide in writing prior to its consideration, so that it'll be ready for discussion. And I remind you that any amendment which increases an appropriation or funding amount, providing the measures as proposed or intends a new amended appropriation, must be accompanied by a corresponding and specific offset for funding source. The remaining chapters will follow the same rules in addressing each chapter individually, and after all questions, if any, are answered, we will signify the chapter closed. If any of my colleagues want a bookmark, and that will come back to that section later, please address that, and we'll bookmark that chapter or that section on the bill. Do we have any questions? Yes, Senator Castro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I've always found you to be reasonable in giving members of the body the opportunity to ask questions, and so just so I can review the rules later, and I know what they are clearly, if I can request for a copy of the rules. Having that said also, Mr. Chairman, I want to go ahead and, in the interest of time so we can proceed, I want to go ahead and bookmark the presentation fiscal year 2020 and come back to it. I understand this morning in a prior conversation you want to go ahead and go through the budget, but so that I can reserve my time and questions that I may have that may challenge the assumptions in terms of revenue projections and the stated expenditures. So if I could just bookmark that for the record.
Yes, sir. We will bookmark that. For my colleagues that maybe have not heard that, the presentation that was presented yesterday in reference to the revenue is being bookmarked so we can come back and discuss it further, even though we go to the agencies. And I think some of my colleagues have brought that up, questioning the revenue.
Yes.
That's what Senator Castro has asked. And unless there's really an objection, I don't see.
Yeah. I object. I have some general questions I want to clear up.
You want to ask it now?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, just as a point of information, so I'd like to bookmark my spot. I'm not necessarily suggesting we bookmark that and move on. So while other members may ask you questions as we go along, I'm reserving my time on that particular item so we can come back. Is that fair?
That's fair. Senator, duly noted.
Did we,
Senator Torres, you had a comment you wanted to make?
I'm just asking, was an objection to that, if that was a motion, was it an objection? So we're going to, was there an objection to,
Yeah,
to
I would
moving on without discussing section 2?
Okay. Okay, then Senator Sabina Perez, did you have an objection to bookmarking that
Well,
section, or?
Some clarification has been made by Senator Castro that he's just referring to his own understanding, not for the whole discussion. So
Thank you, Senator. Thank you very much, Senator
Then if
Perez.
you can identify the section specifically that you want to bookmark, so we'll know exactly which one. and then-
Okay. Well, that's fair. Thank you. I would have found it awkward to object to my bookmark. But let's go ahead, and thank you, Senator Perez, for clarifying that. I want to go ahead and bookmark first page 2 of your initial presentation. Okay? That's it, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
No, he asked to bookmark that unless there's an objection to bookmark, we'll just bookmark that page.
Okay.
Is there an objection to that bookmark? Because it's talking about all your revenue generation. And I think all my colleagues here is going to want to question it, but he wants to hold back until we move along on the chapters, because everything, we need to all understand that the revenue projections that's there, I know that you're going to question it, but when we go to the agencies, you're going to see their funding. If you're satisfied with that, then we can go back and say, is this revenue realistic? We have the folks here, they can answer that. But if you want to answer if it's realistic, whatever is determined to not be realistic, it impacts everybody. But so why don't we just go over page 2 and just work our way down, and then we can go back to the revenue. Because if you notice on page 2, my colleagues, it talks about all your revenue available, where the money's all coming from. It's almost the same thing as what was presented by OFB yesterday. Senator Tello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me. I just wanted to make it clear that when an individual, a member, bookmarks an area, it doesn't allow just that individual to go back to it, but it opens it up for every one of us to also, make comment on it. So it doesn't limit only one person, but allowing that bookmark allows everyone that opportunity as well. And I appreciate it. I support his bookmark.
Thank you for that point of information. Do we have any? Do you understand, Senator Perez?
Yeah, I guess a point of inquiry. So does that mean we're not going to talk about the revenues in general? Because I do have just overarching questions regarding the revenue. I was wondering, because that's the basis of the budget, I would like to ask.
Let's
more
have a short
questions.
recess. We will proceed. The presentation yesterday is the same as page 2. So why don't we proceed down page 2, section by section. We'll start with A. If there's any question on page 2 in reference to the revenue projection, please feel free to ask the question. I know there are questions about the revenue. So, Senator Parrish, you have a question, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for OFB for their presentation and all the work that went behind this. So I just have questions as far as, I know you talked about the revenue projection for next year and how you came about using historical data to predict future revenues. I'm just wondering, I guess, short of asking for the formula, what are the limitations of your projections as far as accuracy?
Well, Senator, as we go forward and we do these projections, you're using a word that in terms of budgeting and projection, there's no such thing as accuracy. What we can do is we try to make it the best possible analysis using data, historical data, and then using that data project forward. But in doing that, you can consider things like anomalies, non-recurring type of incidents and numbers that you take out or you minus just depending on what you're trying to get at the end. So what we do is the way we went ahead and proposed the projection was use historical data going back as far as 2015. But then again, remember in my opening comments is I told you that in fiscal year 2019, it's a very unusual year simply because the implementation of the Trump Act. We didn't have that 4 or 5 years ago. So if you include the Trump Act into the mix, you're going to see, like for 2019, a big jump or big decline, especially in the tax areas, individual tax and business privilege. And not only did we have changes on the local level, on the federal level, we also had changes on the local level that's going to really change those numbers. And if you use data going back 5, 6 years, it might not give you a true picture because what happened 5 years ago doesn't necessarily mean it's happening today. So we take those things into account. So as we use historical data, we go back actually and tweak it a little bit and consider things that are more current rather than what happened 5, 6 years ago that we know chances are not going to recur. So what we do is we just go and do our best assumptions based on current economic conditions, the prevailing wages, just how things are going in the economy, and consider that in the final numbers that we come up for each one of these categories.
Okay, thank you. So in one of our conversations or one of our meetings, I think there was mentioned that there was a surprise that the effect of the Trump tax cut hasn't been fully realized here. I think that's critical. What are some reasons for that, you think, potential reasons? Because I think the reason why I asked that is, well, I have a sort of a hypothesis. Do you think it's coming down the pipe as far as the effect, the full effect? Is that coming down the pipe and it's just a delay that's occurring right now?
When we considered, we got to remember the Trump Tax Act was implemented halfway during the fiscal year 2018. So in the course of fiscal year 2018, we didn't realize the full year of the Trump Act implications. Here we are in 2019, we expect to feel the full effect of the Trump Act, and that's what we're looking at right now. We took that into consideration going into 2020. So what I'm actually saying though is considering all things equal, we went ahead and made the adjustment considering that whatever we collected in 2018, we considered that was maybe 50% of what we anticipate to collect in 18, and then double that up for 2019, knowing that's going to be a full year of its implementation. taking those numbers again, knowing it's going to happen again in 2020, we took that assumption that it's going to recur in 2020. That's how we moved forward on those numbers.
Okay, so to clarify, then you took the worst-case scenario and used those numbers, is that correct?
When you say worst case scenario, we're taking whatever the impact was, again, going back and revisiting, looking at the numbers to see if there was any unusual spikes. There were some categories that we had actual payments. A couple of them were, I think, 1 million, 2 million, all one-time payments that we know is not going to happen again in 2020. So we took those things out. And that's what we call anomalies. Because we know, although it's part of the bottom line number that we're going to get, we know it's not going to happen in the future. So those are the kind of adjustments we make. So, you know, when you talk about worst case scenario, it's the best scenario we can think using the current data that we have going forward.
Because I remember reading somewhere that government revenues decreased 70% because of the Trump tax cut. I don't know what your research has shown as far as the effects to governments.
Well, you know, looking at the current data, maybe I would like to maybe ask Mr. Burns or Bureau of Budget to, you know, maybe chime in on this and give you some insight on, at least on the collection part. And I can give you what we receive using the CRER report that basically, you know, is developed by those two agencies. But what I'm looking at, well, what we're seeing in the reports is that for the first 6 or 8 months of the year, we saw basically a decrease in individual and corporate tax, and we saw an increase in the BBT. And that's how it was, I believe, for the first 6 months of the year. Surprisingly, the recent CRER report shows income tax actually rising. It's increasing. I'm not too sure why. Corporate tax is kind of like being steady, a status quo level, and the BBT is just kind of like you know, hanging in there too. But it's the withholding tax that's showing an increase over the last month or two. That one I really can't explain, and that's as a result of, I believe the latest report was July.
Yeah.
Would have the BBMR or the DOA will respond and maybe comment.
Yeah. Afternoon, Senator Perez. I will refer the body to the testimony that we provided for Bill 186. There's a table on page 2. I think that basically provides all of the analysis from our perspective and the rationale for where it is that the nominal, very nominal difference. I mean, I think it's like less than 0.5% or 0.25% or something extremely nominal, the difference between the projection of BBMR and OFB with respect to the general fund revenues in total. We have a lot of similar assumptions. We have the same data sets. So with respect to our role here, this is not our bill. This is their bill. But we're here to answer questions because for the most part, we are 98% in support of the revenues contained in Bill 186. And again, we provided this analysis. If the body doesn't have it, I would encourage you to get it and make reference to it because it states what it is that we have as far as recommended adjustments as you compare and contrast the two. And I think would be very informative to the process.
Senator Tello?
Mr. Chair, Lester, is this the testimony that you provided dated August 6th?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Senator,
So I just wanted to finish.
you still have?
Yeah, I still have one more question.
Okay.
Yeah, the other question is, so last year's budget, were we pretty close as far as projections? How close were we?
We're tracking very, very well. Again, the body needs to be aware and be prepared for this discussion. The CRER has been published, it's out, and it shows you where we are from an actual collection standpoint, projecting the last 2 months of the fiscal year, and our tracking. Our tracking actually, as was discussed with Senator Therese Talahi a couple days ago, shows that we're actually about $14 million over general fund adopted revenues. And I will note, though, that about a month or two ago, we were at about $23 million in tracking. That number went down to about 20. Now it's down to 14. But, you know, that's to be expected because we had an ACTC reimbursement that came in, so it inflates the revenues artificially. So we back that out of the revenues collected for the period, and then we give you a net amount. So there are a number of documents that have been already provided to the body so that you can see where we are, where the tracking is, and I think that information is pretty useful in being able to understand how we are doing with respect to the revenues as adopted in fiscal 19 and revenues collected.
So just to clarify, so last year's budget was projected to be $1,100,437,094. So you're saying that the actual amount that we collect or is tracking is 14 million over that number?
No, ma'am, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the general fund amount that is contained in the CRER, that portion of the revenues, because sequentially, if you take a look at page 2, you've got taxes, then you've got federal sources, and then you've got special funds. So,
Right.
you know, the cumulative sum is in excess of $1 billion, but the general fund is a very good portion of it. In this year's budget, I think it's about 803.
Yeah, so it just goes to my first question, what is the accuracy? I'm just going back and seeing,
Yeah.
so we projected 700, so then going back to just the general fund alone, it was projected that we're going to get 775,628,968, but what you're saying today is we actually are over 14 million today, is that correct?
Yeah, we're tracking
14 million more?
Yes.
Okay, so that's my question, is how
Yeah, so
accurate are we?
the accuracy, if you were going to be
Yeah.
looking at it from an accuracy standpoint, and I agree with Mr. Guerrero, the reduction in withholding was something that I think we are trying to get our arms around, because we thought that the impact was going to be far less. It is turning out to be, you know, kind of, you know, in our favor with respect to the collection of revenues. The accuracy, I think we were very conservative because, as Mr. Guerrero said, we didn't have a wealth of data. We certainly didn't have 3 years of Tax Cuts and Jobs Act data to go by. And so I think his presentation, particularly with the effects, are consistent with the testimony that we provided on Bill 186. And for the most part, we feel that we have a good handle with the data to date to be able to provide you with a very, very good, you know, budget and the associated revenues to support the operations of the government.
Okay, just looking at this slide 2, so 14 million over, you know, the areas where it's increasing is BPT, other taxes, Section 30, just a little bit, 2 million. I'm sorry, so federal source is about 2.4 million. So really, the loss in individual income tax, the loss from corporate taxes, the loss, sorry, I'm looking backwards. 70, 85, oh, sorry, it's increasing. Never mind. Sorry, I withdraw that question. I was looking at it differently.
Do you have any other questions, Senator Perez?
Yeah, I was just trying to,
if you
I
want,
was trying to analyze the.
okay, then go ahead and analyze. Let's move to the next
two.
colleague so we can
Okay.
move along on the
Thank you.
questions. Senator Tello?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve, with the Trump Tax Act it was implemented in, if I'm not mistaken, yesterday, you mentioned February 2018, correct? So it started from that time. We actually had a full year of the Trump Tax Act. And during that time, in your assessment, how much less did we receive because of this? What was the impact to our general fund? I mean, we had a full year, so you were able to put those numbers together. What is that number as of July 2019?
Okay, Senator.
Or I'm sorry, Steve, can you just do a full year of assessment? And then, because if you think about it, there's 4 more months after February 2018, and if you go a full round in a physical year, you're subtracting 4 months of that physical year. So then you accumulate it in 2019. You know what I'm saying? So there is a full year in order to assess it. And what was the impact?
You know, Senator, when you're trying to compare a full year's effect of the Trump Act, you have to consider you need to kind of start like in October and then in September. And the reason being is that you have 2 tax filing dates. One is in February and was in April. So if your assumption is if I'm understanding you right, if you say to take the figures because it started in February of 2018, take that for 8 months, right? And then the 4 months, it won't really pan that way simply because the collection periods are different. So in other words, what you would collect in April and May would really inflate that particular period and not be representative of the 4 months of the following year. But what I can do is just assume, okay, taking that whatever was collected from February to September of that year, and then plugging in 4 months of 2019, just looking at the impact of what it did between 2018 and 19, just in the tax categories alone. Okay, I got here an analysis showing the difference between July year ending, I believe it says 2019? 1819, right? Yeah, so it shows here the variance is just between February 18 and 19 is about 42 million.
I'm sorry, say again, 42?
42.8 million. Short, negative.
And this was all assessed due to the the Trump tax?
We
Okay.
can assume that because it's the
So
same, it's for the same period.
That's from February 2018 to September 30th, 2018. Now from October, no? Okay, well, that's what I'm looking for. I'm sorry, Lester, I can't hear you. hon.
What we have in the CRER, page 1, gives you a year-to-date comparison.
Well, can't I just get, I mean, I'm not as...
Yeah, Senator, we can slice and dice numbers anywhere we want, but when we're doing budgets, we have to have an apples-to-apples comparison. A month, a full year, and the cumulative collections to the date compared to the same time last year will give you a good sense of and it was contained in Mr. Guerrero's presentation yesterday of how adverse the Trump Tax and Jobs Act, the effect, which again supported the increase of the BPT from 4 to 5%. So, the data that we have before you, I would hope that you'll be able to take a look at it and make your analysis based upon the data before you.
Okay, but I'm just asking how much was the general fund impacted from February of 2018 until February of 2019. And if you guys can't dissect it, I mean, you guys do your reports monthly. So I don't understand why you can't just take February 2018 and go to February 2019 and just give me those numbers.
The numbers are here.
Okay, how much
If
is
you
that?
want if you want the February, then pull up the March CRER.
I'm not pulling up anything. I'm asking you guys for the
Yeah,
numbers.
No, but then you would, why don't you look for the March CRER? And then it will give you a comparative from March 19, which represents the collections from
Okay, so what is those numbers,
February.
Lester?
I
Can
don't
you tell
have
me?
it.
You
I
don't have it?
No,
Okay, okay.
I can get it, but I don't understand what the relevancy is.
There is some well, maybe to you, but to me there is some. And I'm just trying to wrap my head around this and trying to see it from his
So-
perspective. If you're
okay.
getting a lapses, you know, I'm first, okay, so I would like that information, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
and I would like to have that number from February 2018 until September 30th, and then I would like from October 1st until today, how much of an impact the Trump Tax Act caused to our general fund. That's my first question. My second one, and Mr. Chair, I'll make sure my questions are not, you know, I don't put them all out there and allow the others to speak and come back, but I will reserve my place, you know, to come back and ask. Now, my second one is, you talked about $14 million in lapse, but however, I'm looking here, gentlemen, at, and ladies, I'm looking here at the FY adopted revenue projections, let me see. Let me get this straight. Ending July, and then you have the combined comparative statement of revenue, year-to-date actuals, 10 months, ending July 2019. And then it mentions here on page 3, total general fund revenues. It's showing a
Excuse me,
$41,912,300.
Santella, what document are you referring to so that all the colleagues
yes,
can
yes, sir.
follow you on what you're referring
This
to?
is the Consolidated Revenue Expenditure Report, General Fund,
Okay.
Combined Comparative Statement of Revenue, Monthly Actual Collection Comparison, FY19 to FY18 for the month ending July. And next to it, it has the Combined Comparative Statement Revenue Collection, 10 months ending to July 2019. Okay, I'll bring it to you. Just give me 1 second.
Okay, let's take a quick recess and we can get some documents up here. Thank you. We are back from recess. I would ask my colleagues, that if any of you refer to a document, you need to make sure that you ask for a recess so you make sure everybody's got a copy, so we can all follow along. Senator Tello, we are back with you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for allowing everybody that opportunity to follow along, and I apologize for that. It's well noted. So, as I mentioned, Mr. Chair, this report that I'm looking at shows a lapse of 41 million, a lapse since the end of July of 41,912,353. Now, I had a conversation with OFB yesterday, and it was brought to my attention about these lapses. However, on page 3, where it has footnotes on number 3, it's showing that it didn't include October 2018, February 2019, April 2019, July 2019. I believe this is the individual income tax ACTE, or income tax earned credit. Okay, so it did not include that. So you take the 41 million and then you subtract the total of 20,424,652, and you come up with 21,487,701 in lapses. And so now I'm hearing earlier that we're now down to $14 million in lapses. And I just want to know that 14 million, how did we get from 21,487,701 to 14 million? Is that also earned income tax credit that has not been accumulated into the numbers? Or are we, yeah, so I just want to know how we came to 14.
Point of information, Mr. Chair. Could we also just clarify, the way it's printed in the report, these are excess revenues, not lapses. I think lapses are another amount that we have not been able to get firm data
okay.
on.
Oh, thank you.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay, excess
So-
revenue, yes. Okay, thank you.
I would ask either BBMR or OFB can please answer the question.
Thank you, Senator Taitigui. The exercise that you performed for footnote number 3, could you, if you performed it for footnote number 4 and all the other footnotes, then you would come up with $29 million in anomalies, as I refer to them in my testimony, and also in the SCS. Therefore, you would be able to, again, take the $43 million on the far right column, less the anomalies, would get you to the 14 million.
So I did include footnote 4, and that's where it derived to 14 million in excess funding, right?
No, it's $14 million in projected revenues over adopted levels. Projected, with a couple more months to report to the body.
Okay.
We still have, this is only to July, so we have August and September.
Yeah,
So
2 more months.
two more months in the fiscal year to report to the body.
Okay, and the projected excess is, again, 14 million, you said, Lester?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to reserve for the chance to go back later, but
All right.
I'll yield. Okay.
Senator Castro, or you yield to Senator Moylan? Senator Moylan, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate all the explanation on the differences between numbers. But what I like in at least both of the reports is I see black. So black's a good thing, right? It is, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm seeing black at the end, whether it be the projected revenue savings or excess from BBMR at 14 million, that's in the black.
Not to be funny, sir, but we only use one color ink.
Well, it's not red. I get you. But there's no bracket around it, but thank you, Mr. Carlson. Cost savings. I appreciate how you've been chopping the wood to get to that figure, but thank you, Mr. Carlson. In Mr. Guerrero's report, the red was on last year. The black is on this year. So you're looking a little bit more conservative than what Mr. Carlson is saying in the black of 12 million versus 14 million. Is that correct, sir? Right, your projections are 12 million versus Mr. Carlson's is 14 million?
Again, it's just a difference in the way we calculate, but if it's showing 14 million on his report and showing 12 million on mine, it's just basically the way we accounted for the numbers.
Okay, thank you. What I also like to know, since our reports are looking so good with our projected views, how is either one of these reports incorporating our collection with taxes? We understand that we had a problem collecting all our back taxes and figuring out whether it be the illegal B&Bs or whether it be individual income taxes, the aggression that we have now with our revenue and or Department of Revenue and Taxation. How well, I'm projecting in the black, how well are they doing in collecting the taxes that could help us anticipate a stronger revenues to help our economy?
Sir, I would also then draw your attention to footnote number 4, because there are some entries there, specifically non-recurring revenues in fiscal 19. You'll see individual income tax in October of 2.8 million, corporate tax in 3.2 million, then in February, corporate tax of 1.2. So you can see that these are taxes that are not, as Mr. Guerrero said, calculated in our models because they were from prior years, and I'm pretty confident that these are the result of aggressive tax collection. So you see that they are continuing to work on getting taxes due to the government, and these 4 examples here are included in the CRER.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. So on footnote number 4, just for clarification, should I add that to the 14 million, or that's already added into?
No, sir. Those anomalies in the footnotes cumulatively total 29 million. You take that from the 43, and that's where we get the 14. So that's again, one of the exercises that we'd always make sure the body understands. You can't just look at the number of $43,417,000 in tracking above the adopted, because you have to net out the anomalies. So therein lies how we arrive at the $14 million projected. We still have 2 more months to go.
So if all goes well with rev and tax, the projected could increase. Would that be correct?
That could be a possibility, yes, sir.
As much as, in the perfect world, item number 4, as much as how much would that increase then?
No idea what it is that they have in active collections that are near completion.
But with the total individual, if I look at the individual at 2.8, the corporate at 3.2, that's 5 million, another million, 6 million, 7, just under $8 million if I add up all of item number 4. Hopefully they do their job. That's the idea, right? But thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Lee, you had a question, ma'am?
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chair, and good morning, gentlemen. Good morning, colleagues. Just with regard to the questions that were being asked on excess revenue, I'm not sure who would be able to answer, but how much of this, maybe Mr. Carlson, how much of this projected excess revenue is because of the ACTC, the additional child tax credit, is recognized as revenue in this report as opposed to an offset for tax refunds?
Thank you for that question. So in the prior legislatures, we didn't net out the ACTC, but at the urging of Speaker Cruz, we've since made adjustments to this report to more accurately reflect what we get as far as reimbursements, and they are calculated into the revenues, then netted out so that people understand that we're not inflating the revenues. And as the body recalls, 90% of ACTC goes back into the income tax refund account, and 10% is then available to the Department of Revenue and Taxation for their operational needs to process. So yes, we do show you the gross up on the top, and then we do give you on the bottom the footnotes, and in total, the anomalies come out to a net of projecting 14.2 million in general fund revenues, if all holds, to the end of the fiscal year.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. I just want to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page when it comes to that. Maybe you can also answer this. How much of this excess revenue can be attributed to non-recurring revenue, perhaps from our efforts with regards to tax enforcement collections or tax settlements that we've been able to pull in from Department of Revenue and Taxation?
I'm not real sure with the items contained in number 3, what it was that's a result of the aggressive tax collection. I would draw you guys' attention to the recent court settlement. I think it was like $3.7 million. Now it's a matter of collecting on that judgment that Revenue Tax prevailed upon, and that probably won't result in any revenues for months, because now you have to go and find the property and auction the property. So, everything takes a while, as the chairman knows from his tenure at Revenue Tax.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Does this amount account for all possible expenses that are presently encumbered that are prior to the end of the fiscal year? I just want to make sure these things are booked.
No, ma'am. These are only revenues. To be able to, it serves as a guide so that everybody here understands, maybe more so to Senator Perez's question, where we are with budget forecasting, and then how that is implemented, and then ultimately the results. I mean, if we were poor at doing this, then the appropriations against the revenues would really, put us in a pickle. But, I think the combined experience up here and this body's input to this process has continually, helped us to evolve to where we can forecast revenues that, and I think the resounding word in my testimony was attainable. So I think these are attainable.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. I believe Mr. Guerrero commented on this previously, but just to clarify, were any amounts in the general fund used to supplement underperforming special funds? I think the answer was yes, but I just wanted to clarify.
Yes, in 2020.
And then how much, I know in the OFB presentation, they outlined this, but if we could just go back to the special funds and which ones are underperforming, is there a total?
Senator, are you asking for a list of those special funds that are non-performing?
So I think on page 9 of your presentation, this FY 2020 special funds projection, you were going through it. I mean, for case in point, you mentioned customs and quarantine. That's a one-time there was a $1.2 million, guess federal.
It's like a subsidy to
Right,
their
it's a one-time
operation, yes.
subsidy. But then also, there were potentially other special funds that were underperforming. So I just wanted to kind of go over that.
I have the list, Senator. Gosh, let me just see if I can pull it out.
Sorry, you just had mentioned when we were going through this list, it's, you know, customs and quarantine, school lunch, reimbursement fund, and then others. And you had mentioned that there are 5 to 6 other special funds that are underperforming. So I just wanted a little bit more clarification on what those are and how much.
Yes, one fund comes to mind, which is the museum fund. I believe in 2019, the fund was estimated to generate something around $400,000, almost $800,000. In 2019, I think the estimated amount that was in the budget was $968,000. Based on current tracking of the fund, we hope to at least generate half of that, 400,000, maybe even less. So those are one of the funds that as we moved on into 2020, we had to reduce basically the anticipation of revenue collection in that fund, knowing that in the past couple of years, it hasn't been performing. So those are one fund that I know that I adjusted downwards in half, I believe.
Senator, did you want to get a copy? We can produce a copy. We just have to recess so we can make copies so that everybody can have a copy of all the special funds that are not performing.
Right, because I just want to be able to go back to this discussion about excess revenue and the fact that the general fund has to be able to give us some cushion if special funds are underperforming. We want to make sure that what we've appropriated gets to these different agencies and the programs in the government that we've identified need this money. We don't want them to be
Underperforming.
out of luck.
That's why we're at 803. Okay. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator Muñoz.
Point of inquiry, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, the questions that we're asking, are they just based on the presentation? Because we haven't even gone to the bill yet, right?
We're in both we're on page 2 of the bill and the presentation because they both reflect the same numbers.
Okay, okay.
And they're just questions that relate to what's in the presentation on the basis of how it was projected. And I think many of our colleagues here are asking, are we comfortable with this projection? Are we going to under project or over project? And right now on this bill, we try to maintain being conservative and not project at all, because exactly like what Senator Lee brought up, if a special fund doesn't perform, the general fund is what's funding the special funds. So we got to make sure that we don't try to project every penny we've got, and then if something happens, we're all going to be sitting here saying, how did we do this? And that's why we're keeping our projection less. And you see on the budget, it was 803. The administration is projecting 808. We've got like $4 or $5 million difference. It got less than now to 3. And we're trying to keep it as conservative as possible, because at the end of the day, if the money doesn't come in, for the special funds, the general fund funds it, fills those voids.
Okay, so
And that's why they were identifying earlier, there's some agencies weren't coming in. That's why we reduced their budget.
Okay, I don't want to interfere with Senator Lee's time, but I guess I'll just reserve my time after we're done getting the information.
Okay, Senator Castro, before we recess to get a copy of the list so everybody can get a list of all the special funds that are underperforming. Senator Castro, we'll recess for that? Okay, let's recess for a few minutes while we make copies of the underperforming areas. Thank you. We are back from recess. Everyone should have received a copy of the special fund report. So, and I was asked by my colleague, we're supposed to go page by page, so I wanted to make sure we go page by
Mr.
page.
Chair, we didn't get the copy.
Oh, you didn't get a copy? I was asked earlier by my colleagues, we're supposed to go page by page. On page 1 of the Bill Act, does anybody have any questions? It's the introduction of page 1, and then we'll go to page 2, which deals in the refund on the revenue.
Sure.
You have a
Yes.
question, Senator Tello, on the page 1?
Yes, yes, I do. On the first part, the ACTC, okay.
No, Senator Tello.
Oh, on page
I was asked by
one.
my colleague, I had stated we're going to go to page by page.
Oh, page
So page 1 is
of the
only the
bill.
introduction of chapter 1, the general provision, estimated revenue. Then we go to page 2, which is generally the same thing as what was presented by the director. We're on page 2. Do we have any questions on page 2? Yes, Senator Castro. Or you're yielding to Senator Tello?
If it's on page,
We're on page 2, yeah. We're on page 2, right? Okay. So, yes, 1 second, okay, so. All right, Senator Tello, you have a question on page 2.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And the ACTC amount is money that is given to individuals who file based on their income and how many children they have, and this is federally funded, if I'm not mistaken. But the thing is that the government of Guam needs to fork out that money ahead of time to pay these individuals who qualify. And then later on, the federal government reimburses us. So my question is, if I'm not mistaken, it's average about $16 million a year in funds that are distributed to those who qualify for ACTC. When do we get reimbursed by the federal government? The question is, when do we get reimbursed by the federal government for that average $16 million? And did we incorporate that $16 million in the individual income tax?
Senator, let me respond at least to the first part of your question. We make an ACTC claim quarterly. Once we pay out, as you rightly say, the refund, and we usually get it within about 2 weeks of our claim.
Okay, so in 2 weeks' time then. So once you receive a claim then and you pay it out, then you submit it to the federal government then reimburses you. Is that correct, Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
Okay. That's all the question I have. Thank you.
Does any of my colleagues have any questions on page 2? Senator Castro.
Thank
and
you,
then
Mr.
you'll be followed by Senator Teresa Lai. Senator Castro, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, So I am going to refer to page 2 specifically, but I also want to refer back to a previous statement. Mr. Carlson mentioned that he supports the legislature's latest budget document by 98%. I'm still trying to discern, is that programmatic or fiscal, fiscal expression of somewhere in the document. And here, Mr. Chairman, is where I could make my point. For example, in the governor's, I'm referring to the governor's April 9th, 2019 budget document. And then if you take page 2 of our most recent document, and there's several before us, but the most recent one, as of yesterday, 4 p.m., the governor's document listed corporate income tax at about 80 million, whereas our document shows 85 million on page 2. The governor's document of April 19th, I stand corrected, April 9th, shows 240 million of withholding taxes, interest, and penalties. And on our document, line 10 of page 2, we're showing 246 million. So just, very simple math. I'm assuming, there's a delta of about 11 million. So my question, which I don't expect to be answered right now because I want to frame it, is why the major difference, and is that still the administration's position? So that would be 2 questions. Mr. Chairman, I also want to just state for the record so that I can have a better context and understanding of what's going on here. I'm referring now to the Office of Public Accountability's report dated June 25th, 2019, page 2, and a similar message was reflected, and I would have to assume this is Mr. Carlson's attachment to his letter in the committee report of his letter dated August 6, 2019. So if the panel wants to make copies, they may. If they want to give me the benefit of the doubt, I just want to go ahead and read a couple captions from that, and then I'll state my point. Mr. Chairman, in the OPA letter of June 2019, it states very clearly on page 2, and I quote, "For the last 3 years, revenues fell short of projections by an average of $35.7 million annually." The only difference between that caption and this letter, and what I'm assuming is a submitted attachment by BBMR, is that particular line, at least in capturing the message. And so, Mr. Chairman, my point would be, if audited statements are revealing for the last 3 fiscal years that we've fallen short on average by $35 million, my question to you would be, is it safe then to assume that the revenue projections here, as reflected in your most recent budget document of August 22nd, has also taken that revenue shortfall into consideration? I'm talking outside the BPT, Mr. Chairman, because the BPT was not designed to sustain the government of Guam's operations at the time. And I did ask you 2 questions, and then I want to refer also to the FRP, the Fiscal Realignment Plan, and I know that there are certain triggers that kick in the FRP, but I still think we need to pay some attention to that, because in the prior administration, before the BPT was adopted in April of 2018, the executive branch went into a mode because of the fiscal austerity to make certain changements and adjustments in the staffing pattern and operations of the government to meet the anticipated shortfall. Then comes the BPT. And so I put that out there for my colleagues, because as we move forward, as the previous speaker had referenced, in the event that the full effect of the TCJA should hit, I actually have a very different opinion in terms of what the Tax Cuts Jobs Act is actually doing to the economy, but in the event that we anticipate even less revenues, along the same lines of what's referenced here in the OPA report, I'm assuming that you had already taken that into consideration, and I'll leave that with you, Mr. Chairman, because if that's correct, if in fact there's a difference of 14 million and we went with the governor's original submission, then maybe we can revisit at least the increase in taxes to real property improvements that was designed to generate something to the tune of $9.5 million. And I just leave that on the table. I don't necessarily necessitate a response to that, But I would like to go back to the two questions maybe later this afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll get back and answer your questions. Senator Therese, do you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So on page 2, line 3, they give the amount for the provision for tax refunds. So I just wanted to ask Mr. Byrne at DOA if the amount for this year is the same as the amount for last year. And is that correct? 125
In the
million.
bill, yes.
So do you find that reasonable, that it's the same as last year?
Yes, actually, I was looking at the report that DRT puts out, and it shows you the amount, total amount of refunds year by year, and it's pretty consistent. But please remember, right, that the 125 million is net of the ACTC. So when you look at the DRT report, it's like 145 million because of the ACTC effect.
Okay. And even in light of the withholding going up by so much, we're still expecting the same amount in taxes.
Yes, yes,
All right.
I haven't seen much variance in that.
Okay. Can you tell us if this, so this is, the government's required by law to make deposits on the receipt of revenue or the receipt of taxes rather, and make a deposit on that. Has that been done as required by law?
Well, I think the response to this question is the same as previously, that when we receive taxes, right, the total amount of taxes has been appropriated. So there is no cash available to set aside, except when we actually pay those refunds, we set them aside and pay those refunds out of the set aside. So you've only provided for the current year's refunds in this bill.
That's correct. But why are you pointing that out? What is the, I'm missing the point.
I thought it might be helpful.
Yeah, that we're that you still have a refund liability that's not provided for in this bill,
Yes.
is what you're saying?
Yes, and if you look in the financial statements, you'll see it as a liability.
Okay. And, all right, but back to the deposits. So the deposits, they're not being made because you're saying it's impossible?
Yes, you would have to provide another whole year's refund payments for that to take place.
All right.
And there's nothing in this bill to do that.
Can I ask then for FY, I guess for FY 18 taxes, how much was paid out to date?
You mean for
If we set
tax-
aside
tax-
125 million, how much was paid out for FY 18 only?
I want to be clear, for taxpayers' liability in fiscal 18.
Isn't that what we're paying right now?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Plus a few refunds that relate to prior years. From the fiscal year as a whole, including the 2.5 million that I think we're going to pay out on Monday, it would be like round about 88 million.
88, okay. All right, could I ask you also on line 22 regarding the section 30 amounts? So this amount is less than what we projected for FY19 by about 7 million, is that correct?
May I ask Mr. Carlson to respond on the section 30?
Thank you, Senator Talahi. When we were preparing for the governor's executive budget request, we were in communications with the Department of Interior on what it was that we could realistically expect given the war claims. And our request went in at 80 million, but at the time, the projection that we got back from Department of Interior was that they were looking at around 71. So that's how we got that number. That was an interaction in March, and that's the result of the discussion.
All right, and this is the amount that you're expecting to receive, like, next month?
That's what we're looking at, yes.
Okay, so what did we receive, when we projected 78 million for FY19, what did we receive in that year?
I think we got like 77.8.
Okay.
It wasn't exactly, but
But it was
wasn't
close.
It was close, yeah.
All right, because
77046, sorry.
I was looking at the other years, right, just to see, my first question was, did they take out for the war claims how much already, right? I was trying to find that, but I can't really put my finger on it. But I did notice that in, like, for example, FY 2018, we only adopted 68 million, but we actually collected about 77.8 million.
Yes, if you recall, that's when Speaker Cruz, who was chairing the Committee on Appropriations, took verbatim some correspondence that we got, and the budget that was passed was at the floor of 68 million.
Yes, I understand.
And then, we were fortunate to receive
More.
an amount significantly more than that.
Okay, so that was about 9 million more. And then in 2017, we adopted 74.9 million, but we actually collected about 87 million, which is about 12 million more. So I'm curious what happens to that money that we received that was not appropriated because it wasn't we didn't project it. And so is that money still available for FY 2020?
No, ma'am. As you might recall from numerous budget discussions, the prior administration made a practice of using Section 30 to pay debt service, and then almost the entirety of everything else was used to pay pent-up income tax refunds.
All right. So if we received in excess of the 71 million that you're predicting, or we are all predicting here on page 2, that money is subject to appropriation, is that correct?
I believe this budget has a provision this year that anything over adopted goes to pay refunds, the fiscal 19.
All right. I know we did that not me, but the other legislatures had also done that, right? But, all right. And this amount is less what they're going to take out for the war claims, right?
We believe that's net of what
Okay.
will be taken from war claims.
All right. So I just wanted then on the revenue, the I appreciate OFB's conservative estimates, I guess, in many of the categories. It's hard, I guess your tracking helps us to understand that even though we're jumping 22 million in withholding this year versus last year, it's close to what we're tracking, right? So we're predicting 246 million in withholding, but you're tracking 240 million. So I noticed that this 246 is 6 million over the executive's request and the tracking, right, by about 6 million. But you feel comfortable with that, OFB, that 6 million? Because that's one of the few areas where you actually exceeded the executive budget's prediction or request.
Yes, Senator. When we looked at the trends, we were somewhat very confident, only because we've already known what the Trump Tax Act did, at least for the first 9 months of the year or 6 months of the year when we did this projection, and then we also had 6 months of data from 2018. So we're kind of like figuring that we were kind of comfortable going forward with that, although it did show a significant jump. I'm glad to say that at least current trends right now is proving us to be on the mark.
Well, in June, we were tracking 243, but in July, we're tracking only 240 on that withholding, right? So it's going down a little.
Yeah, but I'm talking about overall.
Okay. All right.
Overall.
All right. So then on the special funds, yeah, I only want to. So special funds, we kind of did the opposite. Yeah. So on your withholding, we were, well, let me just say, on the special funds, I can see that in 2019, what we predicted versus what we are tracking looks like we over-predicted on many of these special funds for 2019. Not by a lot, but it's significant, maybe. But the two that I just want to focus on are the Healthy Futures Fund, because a lot of the health funding has been shifted to come out of this Healthy Futures Fund, and I want to, this is a, yeah, I just want to look at this. So the prediction that we're making for 2020 in the Healthy Futures Fund is only about 100,000 over what was predicted in 2019. But that's just about $1 million less than what we're actually tracking. Is that right, for 2019? But you think we're going to make up that $1 million that we're not tracking and the additional $1 million in Healthy Futures? I just don't want these health agencies to be short, that's why.
We hope at least for the next couple of months, by the end of the closing fiscal year, that we hope to at least garner most of that.
Yeah, and I noticed that the executive budget's request, they had the same number as you, so they're confident in your prediction also.
Yes, Senator.
All right, and then the other one, of course, is this TEFF. And I know that you explained, so because in TEFF, in our bill, we have exceeded the executive budget's request for TEFF and I think, yes. Oh, no, sorry, we didn't. I don't know, did we? I can't tell from this document I'm looking at. In TEFF, oh yes, I wrote it.
Yeah, we're slightly
33
below the executive budget.
No, they requested 33,940, and we are putting in here 38,447. You went up. You started with their request, but you went up by $4.5 million, and now you explained earlier that $4.5 million comes from additional real property tax for those developments over $1 million, right? Is that right? I guess I just wanted to ask Lester on this one. When the executive budget put 3,940, they must have known all of that information already. Are you confident we're going to make the 38,447 in real property taxes? That it's going to be that much higher than what you originally predicted? Mr. Carlson? Oh, yes, please. Yeah, because we're predicting more than yours based on that, the real property taxes in excess of $1 million, for properties in excess of $1 million. That's how it was explained to us, and I just want to know what your confidence level is in this number for real property taxes.
The one thing that I would add is that when we show you on the special fund report the amounts received to date and then the tracking, and we do show a variance, but the adopted level was very similar in 1938 million. The good thing is that when Mr. Guerrero mentioned yesterday that the assessments that went out for the million or more was 8 million, we've collected 5, there's still 3. I think that $3 million that remains out there assessed and to be collected will certainly take the tracking and bring it really, really close to the adopted, therefore keeping 19 and 20 relatively same. Because we haven't collected on the entirety of the million or more. The good thing is that the assessment went out, and from when you get a tax assessment, it's something to be very mindful of. So the assessment went out. If we are able to receive those remittances within this fiscal year, be mindful that we still have a couple more months of reporting, then the actual for 19 will be very, very close to the projected for 20. So from that perspective, we concur with OFB's projection.
So you, because you originally projected much less, you projected what we are currently tracking, close to that. But now you're saying you're confident we're going to go much higher, 5 million higher.
In March, when the executive budget request was made, we didn't even have the assessment out yet.
All right.
So I would make it clear to the body that we were limited in the information. The challenge was still in court being addressed. There was a resolution, or the AG, I think, there was a resolution to that, and then after the budget request was submitted, then the assessments went out. So therein lies our comfort level.
So do you think those agencies were, because of the shortfall we're experiencing in the TEFF right now, that they'll be okay in 2019?
We're hopeful. I remind the body again that we reduced the allotments for TEFF in January. We then released some of those reserves. I think that was in July. And we're hopeful that if there's more remittances that come in the next month or so, then we will make available to the agencies who received TEFF appropriations in 19 more of what it is that was appropriated to them.
All right, just, so, thank you. For the 14 million that FY19 is projecting over the adopted levels for FY19, well, do you have a lapses amount that you're projecting also? I know we were talking about that for the last bill. But.
Mr. Carlson, can you please speak into the mic? I'm sorry, I can't hear you very well. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Earlier, just I was asked to do this, but with the paperwork here, it's kind of like, okay, how am I going to do the paperwork and the mic? So, okay, let me just try to scoot everything up. Okay, is that better? Thank you. Do I have a lapse amount? After we had a discussion with the war claims, the governor was, she made a public statement that she believes that wholeheartedly in Bill 181, and that she would not support a bill that appropriated up to $7.5 million if she didn't feel that we were going to be able to realize that amount. So after the chief executive made that statement, it was not my place to make it. I will echo her concerns, and I will say that we will have lapses. I would love to be able to say that 7.5 million is what it is that we will lapse, but I would take the chief executive's comments that she made publicly, and I will say I support them.
Is it possible we might have more lapses? That's what I'm looking for.
No, I don't think so, ma'am. I really don't.
All right.
I think that's the entirety of what we can expect.
Okay, and finally, on some of these special funds, this is on page 3, but these special funds, it was reported, in the media that some of the money had been taken out of those funds, and I know that like, for example, the E911, the governor promised to return that money. So I just wanted to know, for the other funds where the money was taken out, has any of it been returned? I think there was one account from the Chamorro Land Trust in particular that I'm thinking about.
Senator, you're talking about the current year?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, as you mentioned, we have returned the money to the 911 fund because there was a PUC order ordering us to do. for monies taken out in previous years and credited to the general fund, I think you're referring to the monies that were treated as permanent transfers, right? So in the nature of a permanent transfer, that's what it is. It's a permanent transfer and really shouldn't be returned because then it would no longer be permanent, right? So we haven't. But we haven't had to take out any money from special funds in the current year.
In the current fiscal year 2019.
That's correct.
So for those taken out in 2018, that's dead, you're saying. And
Yes.
2019, well, that's good that no additional money was taken out. All right. Are you able to tell us what the revenue difference is for the Guam Highway Fund as a result of the liquid fuels tax increase? Anyone on the panel? Because last year they were unable to tell us an exact amount. I think we were estimating 3 million, but that was always an estimate.
Mr. Chair, what page are we on? I thought we were on page 2. Or 1?
Yes, we're on page 2.
Well, we were talking about these handouts, the slideshows, and so they talk about general funds and special funds. So this is just a question on one of the special funds.
If you look at the special fund report, you'll see Guam Highway Fund, the adopted level was 22,808,000, and the tracking is 25,085. So it is tracking higher than adopted.
Senator Reese, I think Senator Tellos is in order. The only reason why I'm going to comment that is that the highway fund you're asking is actually on page 4. As we move along, after 2, get to 3.
Page 3, Mr.
But no, on the budget document, the bill, it's on page 4, which tells you total highway fund. And as we move through this, where we talk about the special fund, we'll be able to address all of that. And I think you may even have more questions to some of the other special funds, ma'am. So, do you have any other question?
All right. Well, I just would ask them if they could clarify how much of that can be attributed to the increase in liquid fuels tax? If that's the whole increase from 22 to 25, or if it's less?
If I recall, ma'am, the amount that was projected to be received in 19 was an increase over 18, and the projected level was the 22.8. So I would imagine that, again, there was real-world receipts, and that it may not have been a deterrent to driving, and that you still see fuel consumption at a level that is over what we projected.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. It's now, we will take a recess until 2 o'clock, and then we'll start back on page 2. My colleagues, please, I understand you've got the slides, but if you just follow the pages, I think we're going to have many questions, and we're going to talk about special funds, but it'll be on page 3 and then page 4. And as we move along, I know you're going to have a wealth of questions. Thank you.